Welcome to Good Burger Reviews. My name is Johnny and I'm here to review a brand new 2026 horror movie, and that is Passenger.
I saw these on the car last night. 3 scratches just like that.
You didn't stop, did you? It's something unholy.
Something's following us. This movie was released in May of 2026 to theaters. It is directed by Andre Overdahl. It stars Melissa Leo, Lou LaBelle, Japed Scipio, Joseph Lopez, and Miles Fowler. Basic premise. After a young couple witnesses a gruesome highway accident, they soon realize they did not leave the crash scene alone, as a demonic presence called the Passenger won't stop until it claims them both. So Passenger has finally arrived to the theaters, and this was the one where I initially saw the trailer during Scream 7 and got really excited and started to highly anticipate this one just because it seemed really creepy. It reminded me of like a hitchhiker movie, and it looked genuinely scary. But this is part of the reasons why I have tried to avoid trailers as much as possible. Because what tends to happen is either they spoil too much or they set up false expectations. And with this one, that's exactly what happens. Because after seeing the trailer to Passenger, it shot up right to the top of my anticipation list, thinking it was going to be, the next Weapons or the next Obsession even. And this movie does not reach that level of quality. Now, we're going to get into the good, the bad, and the ugly on Passenger to see whether or not if this movie is worth the watch in the theater. So in the positives, I am going to put this movie does remind me of like an urban legend or a campfire story. It has all the traditional bumps, spooks of the nights, haunts, traveling entities, jump scares, all that stuff. And I really did enjoy the movie, or the premise of the movie was actually a really good premise. It's something that we've seen before. This movie was kind of a blend of The Hitchhiker or Hitcher meets like I Know What You Did Last Summer and It Follows. And there was moments of other movies where I was getting like the Nightmare on Elm Street vibe. But the question is how good did they execute all of this? Another thing I'll put in the positives, which I was surprised that this movie had this, which was the soundtrack. There was a list of songs that I am going to download that were in this movie. I just felt like not only were the songs that were in it like added to the atmosphere and the tone of the movie, but they were decent, good songs. A lot of classic, like 1970s vibe, 1980s vibe. This whole movie was kind of giving like 1970s, early 80s vibe as far as how it was set, like how the characters behave, what the setting was like, some of the cars. And it was kind of like, I just heard someone saying that in It Follows, it tricks you into being timeless because there's cars from all these eras in it that gives it a timeless feel. And this movie, oddly enough, had the same thing going on. Like there were like old school cars, modern cars. These guys are actually driving in like this really hopped up van that's like a little miniature RV. Our main characters decide to take this huge road trip. Basically, they move into their vehicle and they're on the road for quite some time in this movie. And that will lead me to the mix. So the big mix for me in this one was just the use of jump scares. So some of these jump scares, they really got me. And maybe, after seeing the preview, I should have. The reason the preview got me was because of the jump scares in the preview. So maybe I should have expected more jump scares. There was just a lot of jump scares, and most of them were unearned. Most of them were probably unearned, but some of them were good. I mean, I felt like there was creative tension in this, a lot of tension, because it always seemed like the movie was working on some sort of jump scare or a potential jump scare or like a fake jump scare. Like there was this one jump scare that was like a garbage truck. And then one time, the two main characters spook each other. And I'm just thinking, enough with the silly jump scares. I just mentioned this in a movie I love, Faces of Death, where there was like this waffle jump scare. Like, why do I need waffles to jump scare me? And this movie had similar jump scares. Now, some of the jump scares were really unnerving and scary, and the tension in some of these scenes where you're kind of waiting, even though the music is cueing you and the actors are kind of cueing you and the lighting is definitely cueing you. So like it seems like the directors here used all the jump scare tricks, the flashing lights, the darkness, the trees, specific shadows or images in the background that potentially might be someone that looked like maybe a person or an entity, but you're not really sure until the light comes on, or until they zoom in closer, or until the main character turns around and sees what it is. And sometimes it was the entity, and other times it was like a bush or a tree that just looked like a person. So the next thing I'll put in the mix is, I guess I'm kind of mixed on the two main characters. So oddly enough, they were kind of likable, but they were kind of blah. They were very predictable, just very generic carbon copy characters. Even though I liked them, I mean, they were romantic. I mean, they were newlyweds. They were living in their car. They did some endearing things towards each other. Like, one thing that comes to mind is the girl gets spooked off by the entity in the one scene, and no one's believing her, but the boyfriend believes her. It was very endearing because it seemed like what she was saying was completely made up. So the characters overall, I felt mixed on them, just because like you kind of like them, but you kind of just like, whatever happens to them, whatever happens to them. They just had a very basic feel.
Shit! You gotta be kidding me.
Ty?
Betty!
So that will lead me to the negatives. So in the negatives for this one, it's definitely going to be the stupid decisions or the stupid plot points, the utter conveniences of things in this movie just to kind of get you from A to B to C. And some of this I will have to elaborate on in spoilers, but it just seemed like, other than our main characters, every other thing in this movie was just like a device to get us to the next jump, or to the end game, which is where where the movie wraps it up at. And it just, there was really, sometimes it seemed like this entity is chasing them, and when do you call it quits and get off the road? And maybe, I think at some points maybe they couldn't get off the road because the entity does have like a grip on them, but there was one night after multiple spooky things had happened, they tried to stay in a hotel some nights because they were tired of being on the road, but one night, one of the crucial nights, they literally parked in the deep woods. And I thought, after all the spooky stuff that has happened, why would you park here? Which leads to the extreme predictability in this movie. There wasn't, I mean, you could see everything that was coming, whether it be the jump scares or just the ending was very designed. It just seemed like so many things that were just added to be plot points. There's this little GPS that comes into the movie in the beginning, and then it plays a little role at the end. It was kind of obvious there. She also had this little St. Christopher medal, which plays a crucial role in this movie. And these little things were just conveniently there just to be those plot points. Otherwise, they just had no place in this movie. And the last thing I'll put in negatives is just the ending is definitely weak. And I definitely have to elaborate on what the ending is in the spoiler section. But I just felt like the movie has a decent premise, but the overall execution and the overall feel of it is very basic. This is a very B feeling movie, and I kind of, like I said, I thought I was going to get it like an A spooky movie. I mean, I've been referencing It Follows, but this isn't the quality of It Follows. It's like Dollar Store It Follows. So I'm going to give a spoiler warning here so that we can get into kind of all the negatives and just some of the spoilerific things and just like some of the stupid decisions that these characters haven't made. I mean, I do want to say I still like this movie because it was right up my alley. This is kind of maybe one of those will become like a guilty pleasure. But you've been warned. Spoilers. This movie opens with pretty much a lot of what I saw back in the trailer back in February, which you see two guys in a vehicle and they're kind of looping around the same curb over and over again, and you see this mysterious entity on the side of the road. It also seems like the entity at some point gets into the car and ends up causing the car to crash. So you have the characters in this opening scene, they were kind of comical. They were two buddies, they were traveling somewhere. They don't really elaborate much on them, but the one guy gets a drink of water, and the guy's like, stop drinking all this water, you have a small bladder. So like there was a little comedy edge between these opening two characters. And the guy says, oh, I'm a camel, which was like, oh yeah. And then like 5 minutes later, they stop to pee, which is when the entity latches onto them. Because the whole premise behind this is when you're driving on the roads in this area, wherever it is, it seems like it's everywhere. It's like this entity could be almost everywhere. But the movie kind of comes to an end in Arizona. So I guess we're in the West. The entity latches onto them, and there's basically a couple of jump scares, pretty much everything that's in the preview, and then we flash forward to our couple. Now, what I didn't realize right away was that we kind of rewinded time a little bit, because the couple is moving out of their apartment and they are moving into their van, and they're gonna go on. I thought it was just really gonna be a road trip, but apparently they're pretty much trying to live on the road. They're from New York, Brooklyn, and they want to leave New York life. They're tired of paying rent. They're tired of being stationary. And as someone that's moved out of New York, I can get the sense of, the traffic in New York is terrible, which was ironic because later on in the movie, they get stuck in a traffic jam somewhere in the Midwest. And I thought, I guess you can't escape traffic even once you've left New York. But then this couple stops at a diner. They do a couple things before all of a sudden they're on the road at night and they're being stalked by this car, which turns out to be the same dude from the preview. From the same dude. There was one dude had been gotten by the entity in the opening scene, and the one dude, the guy who had to pee, was still alive. So he's stalking them on the car, trying to get them to stop, and he's honking and stuff. And that was another thing funny about this van. The Hawaii 5-0 theme is the horn on their van, which actually plays a role into the movie a couple times, which I thought was a little cheesy comic edge to it. But the guy ends up crashing into a tree, and that is when the entity latches on to now our main characters, Tyler and Maddie, by the way, if I didn't say their names. And it seems to be latching more onto Maddie immediately. She was the passenger at one point. In fact, Tyler even referred to her as her little passenger when like he was getting sleepy. She's like, oh, I can drive. He's like, no, you be my little passenger. So there we go, referencing the title, but really for no reason. But she ended up driving up a little bit anyway, so she wasn't always the passenger. And it turns out the reason this movie's called The Passenger is because the entity is the passenger. So for a good portion of the middle part of the movie, this entity basically does a whole It Follows thing, and they get these little scratches on. There was a scratch on the vehicle in the opening scene, and there was a scratch on their van, and the scratch was like 3 lines. You see that in the poster as well, and the 3 lines went on the vehicles. They just, especially on the van, it just reminded me of Freddy Krueger scratches, like -1 line. Like literally, if it would have been 4, everyone would be saying, "Oh, that's Elm Street," but they just brought it down to 3, and it, it still looks like Elm Street scratches. You are all my children now. So they stop one night, and they're in a like a residential neighborhood suburban area, and like this guy knocks on the van and says like, "I'm the watch patrol, you can't park here, no campers in our residential area," so they have to drive, and then they come across the entity again, and they end up going to this like RV campground where like people with movable houses can park temporarily, and she meets this woman who instantly is the older person in the movie. Usually it's an old man, but in this movie it's a woman. Her name's Diane, and she's like, beware, she's already like creepy, and like she tells this story kind of vaguely about the passenger. Just
what rules? You don't. Jesus Christ, you don't know the rules?
Have an aneurysm, why don't you?
There are certain rules that one must abide by in order to successfully survive a horror movie.
This movie is like Scream. It has rules. So like the rules are like, you're not supposed to stop, you're not supposed to help anyone, and you're not supposed to let this entity in. So it's unfortunate at this point. They learned the rules after they had already attached the entity to them, so they were kind of screwed. And there's also like this hobo code. Like she gets her hold on this book where it's like a hobo code, and that's where she sees the 3 lines which say not safe to be here, and then there's like another like circle with an arrow which says go this way, which plays a role later on. The sign of the person, I guess, is the sign for the entity. I don't know, the passenger. But it's stalking her at first. There's this other scene where she's like, they're at the gym because someone had told them, the gym, when you're homeless, or not that they're homeless, but when you're traveling with an RV or a van, the gym is your friend. You have the showering, you can park there without getting harassed by the locals or the police. And there's a scene where she gets out of the gym and he's still on the treadmill, and the entity stalks her in the parking lot. Now, I felt like there was this whole little gag where it circles around and the van's further and further. So like sometimes this entity just can do whatever it feels like. It just plays whatever gag it wants to. And this was one of those moments. Now, like this was pretty neat, but it was just a gag. And then, I thought, why didn't you run back into the gym and just go be with your boyfriend until he came out? But she doesn't. She's texting him to come out, and he eventually does come out, and that's when they notice the slashes on their van at first. Then after that, the next night is where they go and park in the middle of the woods, and they're watching a movie, and this is where the entity really goes after both of them. So now he's like, even though he said he believed her when she was complaining about it earlier, like after the gym incident, it was like he didn't believe her, but he just wanted to believe her because he loves her. He's a good boyfriend. And they're out in the woods, and the entity's doing all the tricks in the woods, popping up behind trees and all this stuff. It's all the typical jump scare gags. And he finally realizes, like, crap, we got to do something. And that's where, she said, oh, well, that lady Diane, she kind of knew about this. And he's looking at her like, well, why didn't she warn you better than this? And it was like, well, so their solution is they're going to go find Diane, and that she was working her way to Flagstaff, Arizona, and that she'll be able, like, they know that she's going to be the one that's going to solve it for them and help them figure it out. So that's exactly what happens. They find her in some campground, and this was another funny part where they show up at the campground. She's asking for Diane. Everyone obviously knows who Diane is, and they're like, yeah, we don't know her. And then Diane's like, why did you come? And she's like mad at them at first, but then she instantly caves in and says, you've brought the entity with you. We need to evacuate. And all of a sudden it was like the entity was like a scene from Twister. Like it was like a Twister was coming. It was like so windy. Everyone's running and panicking, jumping in their little RVs and taking off. And
It's already here. Everybody underground now! Billy! Honey! Come on!
Diane agrees to show them to, she had basically said, go to the church of St. Christopher. So St. Christopher plays a role in this. They have the St. Christopher medallions and the little necklaces, which was kind of keeping this entity at bay from them. And she says, someone was able to get away from this entity, and it happened at the St. Christopher Church. And she says, you have to know the signs and you'll find your way. And she was going to take them, but the entity instantly shows up and gets her. So unfortunately, they brought the entity to her, and the entity kills her. So poor Diane. So then they're making their way, following the little hobo signs, to this church, which is like in the desert. You know, it looks like it's definitely Arizona. It looks like it's near the Grand Canyon. And they basically see this church. They're like, right before you get to the church, there's like all these corpses on the ground. And the guy's like, oh, the entity's just making us see this so that we won't go. And they basically drive up to the church, and then the Hawaii Five-0 theme plays, because that's the horn, which was comical. And it was just a very generic ending. Like, the entity does all his tricks, basically gets the boyfriend out of the van. She's in the church alone. She rails him into the, like, St. Christopher statue. It kind of reminded me of the end of Hard Eyes, when the killers get killed on the St. Valentine's Day statue. But, you know, the end. And then, you know, the other big predictable thing was when they were in the campground in the way beginning, there was this big sign that said, burn the van. And I'm like, this movie's going to end with their van burning. And that's exactly what happened. The church catches on fire when the entity dies, burning up the entire church along with the van. And her and him get out. And once the entity's dead in the church, it's the end. You know, they're done. And this guy had hit the little GPS button, because the fire trucks are like coming almost instantaneous as the sun's coming up as well. And she's like, how they're here so fast? And he's like, oh, I hit the emergency call button. And that's it. It was just a very generic ending. Like, I just felt it was kind of weak. The entity did a lot of gymnastics, screaming, and like you see it more, and it's got like white eyes and stuff right before it dies. So this is something that honestly I felt like would have came to streaming. So we're gonna get down to business on this one. So I feel like overall, because I anticipated it so much, it ends up being a slight disappointment. But because this storyline is right up my alley, it's got, you know, the entity, it's got darkness, it's got some decent jump scares. I didn't hate the movie. I didn't love the movie. It was okay. So with that being said, this thing, if I've ever had a decision pretty quick, and I've kind of felt this right out the gate, like, this movie's a basic burger. You know, it does get the job done, but it's nothing spectacular. And at the end of the day, I would say, don't rush out to the theater to see it if you have to pay full price. I would say this is definitely one that you can wait till streaming. If you like these type of B-horror, slasher / entity vibe type movies with, you know, just very basic characters, you're not going to get like a deep plot or anything. You're not going to get obsession for sure. So I'll leave it at that. And just a little funny story. On the way home from the theater, literally, there was a car pulled off to the side, and it was in an accident. And it was really weird, because I'm like, the person I was with, I said, what did that car even hit? There was nothing else there. The police were there, but they didn't hit the police. The police were behind it. The car was smashed in the front. I'm like, what did they hit? I'm like, they probably hit the entity from our movie. It was really weird. I'm like, okay, we're not going to stop here. We're definitely not going to stop. We're going to keep going. Police got this. You know, just a funny little tidbit about the ride home from the movie. Anyhow, please like, subscribe, tap that notification bell, And don't forget to stay scared of passenger entities that will follow you